Welcome to Epoch Origins. Every system you live inside was designed by someone. The question is whether you were ever meant to see the blueprint. Today, we turn to a place most people drive through and never think about again. A state with more pronghorn antelope than people. A state with no income tax, no corporate tax, and almost no questions asked. A state that looks like nothing and hides almost everything. This is Wyoming. And what happens inside its borders shapes wealth and power across the entire planet. Wyoming has a population of roughly 577,000 people. It is the least populated state in America. There are more registered business entities in Wyoming than there are human beings living in it. In 2023, the Wyoming Secretary of State's office processed 590,000 business filings in a single fiscal year for a state with fewer residents than the city of Albuquerque. Wyoming registers 378 new businesses per 1,000 adults. The national average is 36. Most of these businesses have no employees, no office, no operations in Wyoming whatsoever. They exist on paper inside a system specifically engineered to make ownership invisible. Welcome to America's onshore offshore. But to understand how the emptiest state became the most opaque, you have to go back to the beginning. Wyoming's story begins with the railroad and an act of radical politics that almost no one saw coming. In 1867, the Union Pacific Railroad pushed westward, and thousands of workers flooded into what was then the western edge of Dakota Territory. By 1868, Congress carved out a new territory, Wyoming. It had roughly 9,000 residents. Over 6,000 were men. Fewer than 1,000 were women. On December 10, 1869, the Wyoming Territorial Legislature did something unprecedented. It passed the Women's Suffrage Act, granting women the full right to vote and hold public office. Wyoming became the first government in the world to do so. The reasons were not entirely noble. Some legislators wanted national publicity for the territory. Others hoped the right to vote would attract more women to a region desperately short of them. Some Democrats voted for it expecting the Republican governor to veto it, a political dare. He signed it instead. In 1870, Esther Hobart Morris was appointed the first female justice of the peace in the United States. That same year, 6 women in Laramie became the first women in American history to serve on a jury. When Wyoming applied for statehood in 1890, Congress threatened to reject it unless women's suffrage was removed from the Constitution. Wyoming's delegates sent back a telegram that has become legend. "We will remain out of the Union 100 years rather than come in without the women." Wyoming earned its nickname, the Equality State. But equality was only half the story. Because while Wyoming was writing the future of civil rights with one hand, it was being hollowed out for extraction with the other. Wyoming sits on top of one of the most mineral-rich landscapes in North America. And for over a century, the pattern has been the same. Outside interests arrive, extract what they need, and leave. Coal came first. By the late 1800s, the Union Pacific Railroad was not just passing through Wyoming, it was mining it. The Powder River Basin, stretching across northeastern Wyoming, holds the largest deposits of coal in the Western Hemisphere. Since 1986, Wyoming has been America's #1 coal producer, providing roughly 40% of the nation's supply. Then came oil, then natural gas. Wyoming became one of the top 10 petroleum-producing states in the country. The state's economy was built not on manufacturing, not on technology, not on agriculture, but on pulling things out of the ground and shipping them somewhere else. And then there was uranium. And this is where the story darkens. In 1951, geologist David Love discovered uranium deposits at Pumpkin Buttes in the Powder River Basin. What followed was uranium fever. Prospectors and ranchers scrambled for claims. The federal government withdrew over 65,000 acres from public entry. Governor Millward Simpson put the National Guard on alert, fearing violence between ranchers who owned the surface and mining companies who owned the minerals beneath it. Wyoming has produced over 250 million pounds of uranium concentrate since the 1950s, more than any other state. Its known reserves are estimated at 350 million pounds. This is the material that fuels nuclear power plants and, in its enriched form, nuclear weapons. The state also holds the world's largest trona deposit, a mineral processed into soda ash, supplying 90% of the nation's demand. Wyoming's underground is not empty wilderness. It is a strategic reserve of extraordinary value. But here is the structural truth that Wyoming's economy reveals. The state has no income tax, not personal, not corporate, because it doesn't need one. Wyoming funds its government almost entirely through severance taxes on mineral extraction and federal mineral royalties. The land pays the bills, the people don't have to. This created something unusual. A state with almost no tax infrastructure and almost no incentive to build one. That absence would become the foundation of something much larger. In 1977, Wyoming did something that would quietly reshape global finance. It became the first state in America to authorize the formation of limited liability companies, LLCs. The IRS initially disputed the structure, but by 1988, they relented, allowing LLCs to choose how they were taxed as a corporation or a partnership. Other states followed, but Wyoming had a decade's head start, and it had built something no other state was offering: layers. No state income tax, no corporate tax, no franchise tax, no requirement to publicly disclose the names of LLC members or managers. And critically, the ability to stack LLCs inside trusts and trusts inside other LLCs, creating a layered structure of ownership so opaque that tracing the actual human being behind the money becomes nearly impossible. Financial investigators have a name for this. They call it the Cowboy Cocktail. And this is where history becomes uncomfortable. As of 2021, Wyoming's trust companies managed approximately $31.5 billion in assets, according to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The state's business registration rate has been growing at a pace wildly disproportionate to its population. In 2015, Wyoming had roughly 128,000 active businesses. By 2023, the Secretary of State was processing nearly 600,000 filings per year. According to law professor Allison Tate of the University of Richmond, Wyoming is advertising itself as the new onshore offshore. What the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands are for international money, Wyoming is becoming for domestic and increasingly global wealth. And the problems are not hypothetical. In 2024, Fremont County Assessor Tara Berg investigated companies using fake addresses to register businesses in her county. A 95-year-old resident discovered his identity was being used. Addresses belonging to Wyoming Catholic College and the town of Shoshone were fraudulently listed on corporate filings. In May 2024, the Secretary of State dissolved 3 companies flagged by the FBI for suspected ties to North Korea, registering shell companies in Wyoming. The emptiest state in America is full of other people's secrets. There is another layer to Wyoming's architecture, one that operates not in the shadows of anonymous LLCs, but in the polished offices of trust attorneys in Jackson Hole and Cheyenne. Wyoming allows what are called dynasty trusts, irrevocable trusts that can last for up to 1,000 years. 1,000 years. A family can place assets into a Wyoming dynasty trust today, and those assets can pass from generation to generation, shielded from estate taxes for the next millennium. Most states impose a rule against perpetuities, a legal limit on how long a trust can last, typically around 90 years. Wyoming abolished that limit. South Dakota and Nevada did something similar, but Wyoming's combination, no income tax, no disclosure requirements, plus dynasty trusts, layered with anonymous LLCs, creates a package that is unmatched. This is not illegal. Every component of the Cowboy Cocktail operates within the law. That is precisely the point. The architecture of wealth preservation in Wyoming was designed by legislators, lobbied for by trust attorneys, and maintained by a political class that has actively resisted transparency reforms. In 2022, a Republican-sponsored bill aimed at increasing trust transparency was rejected in the Wyoming State House reportedly after pushback from trust attorneys. In 2023, a bill that would have required LLCs owned by trusts to identify the trust and its trustees also failed. The system is not broken. It was built this way. There are two Wyomings, and they exist in the same state but in entirely different realities. The first Wyoming is Jackson Hole, one of the wealthiest communities in America. Home to billionaires, hedge fund managers, and tech founders who moved there for the scenery, the privacy, and the tax advantages. The median home price exceeds $2 million. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City holds its annual economic symposium here, where central bankers from around the world gather in the shadow of the Tetons to discuss the future of global monetary policy. The second Wyoming is the Wind River Reservation, home to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. It is one of the poorest communities in the United States. Life expectancy is significantly below the national average. Unemployment rates have historically ranged between 35% and 80%, depending on the season and the source. The reservation sits on land that was once a continent reduced by treaty, broken by policy, and surrounded by a state that became wealthy from the minerals beneath and around it. These two Wyomings coexist within 150 miles of each. One is a destination for people hiding wealth. The other is the consequence of wealth being taken. What they don't teach you in economics class is that both of these realities were designed. Wyoming's mineral wealth funds the state. Wyoming's secrecy laws attract outside capital. Wyoming's indigenous communities bear the environmental and economic cost of extraction. And Wyoming's legislature ensures that the architecture stays in place. The equality state gave women the vote before any government on earth. And 150 years later, it built one of the most sophisticated systems of financial opacity in the modern world. Both of these are true. Both are Wyoming. Wyoming is not finished building. In fact, it may be just getting started. In 2018, the state began passing a series of bills making Wyoming the most crypto-friendly jurisdiction in America. It created legal frameworks for digital asset custody, recognized decentralized autonomous organizations (DAOs) as legal entities, and established a special-purpose depository institution charter for crypto banks. Kraken's crypto banking arm, Avanti Financial, and others have set up operations in the state. Wyoming is positioning itself as the regulatory home for the next generation of digital finance, just as it positioned itself as the home of the LLC in 1977. The strategy is identical. Move first, build the legal architecture, and let the capital follow. If Wyoming's existing structures already make it nearly impossible to trace who owns what happens when those structures are combined with programmable digital assets, decentralized ledgers, and AI-managed trusts? What does financial opacity look like when the paperwork disappears entirely? The Cowboy Cocktail is going digital, and no one is writing the rules fast enough to keep up. Wyoming is 97,000 square miles of wind, sage, and silence. It is the kind of place that makes you feel like you are standing at the edge of the world where nothing happens, where no one is watching, where the land stretches so far in every direction that it seems impossible. Anything could be hidden here. And that is exactly the point. The most effective architecture of power is the kind you never notice. It does not announce itself. It does not build towers. It files paperwork in a quiet office in Cheyenne and waits for the rest of the world to look somewhere else. Wyoming gave women the vote before any nation on earth thought to try. It fueled the nuclear age from its own soil. And now it holds more anonymous corporate entities than human beings, a state that turned its own emptiness into an asset class. The system works because it looks like nothing. A filing fee, a registered agent, a P.O. box in a town you have never heard of. But behind that nothing are billions of dollars, thousands of hidden owners, and a legal architecture that was built deliberately, methodically, and over decades to make sure you never find out who they are. This has been Epoch Origins. We do not deal in conspiracy. we deal in architecture. If this changed how you see the system, subscribe. Share this with someone who still thinks Wyoming is just a flyover state. And stay close, because the next structure we decode is already in motion.